Massachusetts prosecutors face sanctions for misconduct in a case that once sent a teen to prison for 17 years.
Oh no. Oh no.
This and more in today's video. Hello, and welcome back, roommates, to another titillating edition of Alexasrewm, where we are not lawyers, we are not medical professionals, and we are not law enforcement. We are just people who have opinions. Opinions might not be as funny as they usually are today because I am morbidly exhausted and I have one less toe that is functioning. Still, we have opinions about all things going on in the true crime community, including two former prosecutors out of Plymouth County have their careers now hanging on the line after a board bar of overseers committee found unacceptable misconduct and racial bias that put Frances Choi behind bars for a crime she didn't commit after trying her for the same crime thrice. So if you're unfamiliar with this absolute clown show of a case, here's how these squirmy wormies managed to railroad Frances Choi, who at the time was a high school senior, into a conviction that led her to spending 17 years of her life in prison for a crime she didn't do. So Frances was a Brockton high school honors student at the time that she was arrested, along with her 16-year-old nephew, Kenneth Choi. Now, this says that they were indicted separately in June of 2023, but I believe that is a typo. I think they meant June of 2003. That's how old this case is. So Kenneth, who migrated from Hong Kong, where his mom lived and couldn't afford to take care of him anymore, she had, I guess, shipped him off to live with Frances and her parents back in 2000. Now, based on the information available, it seems like there was a little bit of hostilities between Kenneth and his grandparents, Jimmy and Anne. That might have led to them being unalive. I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds of the where, the when, the how it happened. I'm going to actually shelve that and save it for a members only video. That video should be uploaded within the next couple of days. But just to give you a rough overview, a little bit before 5 a.m., firefighters arrived. And to the tune of these two teenagers, Frances and Kenneth, yelling from an upstairs window for help, and that the adults were trapped inside, according to Contemporary Herald reporting. Whatever the heck that means. Firefighters rescued them through the window, but found the adults unconscious. Anne Choi would end up dying that night from burns and smoke inhalation, while Jimmy Choi would hang on for a bit longer before he also had unfortunately passed. Now, the fire was deemed suspicious pretty much right from the get, and police even recovered a note authored by Kenneth with a pinpoint plan of how the fire was going to go down, which included tasks like get gas, pour gas in bottles, fire up the basement, fire up grandfather's room, and wait for cops. If you're going to start a fire and you're going to make a list of how to start a fire, wouldn't you also think to, I don't know, burn the list in said fire? Wouldn't that be part of one of these steps? I don't know, I'm just saying. So Frances and Kenneth were both tried separately, and Frances's first trial ended in a mistrial in 2008. So this all happened in 2003, and things didn't even kick off into trial until 2008. And then Kenneth's trial began 4 days later, and he was somehow magically acquitted, even though he's the one who authored the step-by-step how-to guide to how to burn your grandparents in a fire. And these two snakes end up arranging an immunity deal for Kenneth, and he ends up testifying against his aunt in her second trial. Jurors, once again, can't seem to reach a verdict. So then, instead of cutting their losses, they say, nah, we're going for a three-peat. And during this time, in between her second trial and her third trial, Kenny Boy flees to Hong Kong. But his previous testimony is used against her from the second trial and was read in court. And Bradley and O'Sullivan, the two snakes who we're talking about today, were able to successfully secure a conviction, and Francis Choi was sentenced to 2 life terms. So fast forward to 2020, and Francis finally gets freed. Apparently, there was a treasure trove of racist email that suddenly revealed themselves, indicating the two prosecutors shared the kind of bias you usually only find on your drunk aunt's Facebook wall.
Today, to not go forward with a 4th murder trial for a woman accused of killing her own parents. Francis Choi was convicted of setting fire to a Brockton home back in 2003. But a judge vacated her conviction earlier in the year, partly because of racist emails that were written by the prosecutors in the case. Back in the spring, Choi was released after spending 17 years in prison.
Pin it on the girl, because I guess her racial bias stopped at Asian men. So then in 2024, the city of Brockton ends up coughing up big time. And they settle this lawsuit for her wrongful conviction, where they pay her $3.75 million. And if I'm Karen Reed, you know I'm paying close attention to this story, because, wow, imagine this could have been Karen Reed. This totally could have been Karen Reed. And I know it's a different county. I know it's a different set of judges, a different court. Attached to the complaint was an image where a prosecutor had cut and pasted an image of Francis next to a picture of a burning building. This is a teenager that you're talking about. It's like, how disgusting and depraved of a human being do you have to be? She also said, I will show up tomorrow wearing a cheongsam and will be the one doing origami in the back of the courtroom. Keston said Brockton settled based on the financial exposure. Yeah, so they also didn't want to pay her upwards of $34 million. Imagine that. Imagine that. And the person who most likely did it, you know, the guy who authored a note and then fled the country, is not able to actually be brought to justice. Like, what? So unfortunately, the wheels of justice are a little slow moving, at least in the great state of Massachusetts, in specific county. Thankfully, it looks like this is being taken a little bit more seriously, especially nowadays. I can only imagine, right? We are mainly struck by how seriously the respondents' misconduct undermined the integrity and reputation of prosecutors in this Commonwealth. BBO hearing committee members Pael Salzberg, hope I didn't butcher your name, and Melina Mittigi Garland wrote in their report. They added that the unacceptable behavior illustrated terrible judgment and a complete disregard for the high standards a prosecutor should meet. It took prosecutors John Bradley Jr. and Karen O'Sullivan, of course she's a Karen, no offense to any Karens out there watching, 3 tries to convict Francis Choi on charges that she set fire to her Brockton home in the early hours of April 17, 2003 to burn her parents alive as they slept, which is just like totally sick and twisted. So during the trials, according to a board of bar overseers report, the prosecutors were engaging in misconduct that included withholding exculpatory evidence and demonstrating racial bias against the defendant in emails, including the one that we just talked about with the origami. Like, I bet you think you're so funny, right? When the prosecutor's actions give even the impression of bias, when defendants are not treated with dignity or respect, when prosecutors do not ensure they are playing by the rules and disclosing exculpatory evidence as required, the public is left to question whether the promise of a fair trial has been fulfilled. So not only are they sending these completely racist and disgusting emails to one another, but they also failed to hand over certain evidence that would have been probably helpful in building her case And, you know, her being so young, and I don't know how much family she had available or around her at the time to help guide her through this process, but I can imagine it was incredibly difficult no matter how smart you are, right? You're still just a kid. You don't know. Doesn't seem like she had any kind of previous record or trouble with the law. And I think, too, one of the biggest pieces of evidence that they claimed, and we'll get into this deeper in my members only video, was that they said, oh, she had gas on her clothes, which they apparently didn't even test until after she was arrested. And they never, I believe, actually did find gas on her clothing. And that was a complete and utter lie. And they never tested Kenneth's clothes for gas, even though he's the guy who had the note, who had the little step-by-step how-to guide of how to burn your grandparents alive. Like, so all 3 BBO members recommended sanctions that must make clear to the bar and to the public the serious and repugnant nature of their misconduct. Yeah, I mean, they should completely lose their licenses to practice law. 100%. Otherwise, what's the point? Salzberg and Garland recommended a 1-year suspension for Bradley, the lead prosecutor in the trials, and a 2-year suspension for O'Sullivan, who served as second chair. So why more for Karen? O'Sullivan's recommended suspension is longer in dispute, as she was the junior prosecutor and had prepared the lead investigator for his trial testimony. Okay, this meant she would have had access to his file, which included exculpatory information not shared with the defense, according to the reports. The 3rd BBO member, Charles Babish, agrees to sanctions, but recommended that O'Sullivan be indefinitely suspended for her behavior. Yeah, I mean, if they're practicing currently, they shouldn't be allowed to ever again, period, end of story. In my opinion. Gosh, like, what kind of can of worms does this open up? We're seeing all this stuff happen with Proctor now. And how his misconduct in one case is now leading to a whole shitstorm for all these other cases where there could be actually highly dangerous individuals that could now just walk scot-free and commit another crime because, well, Michael Proctor had to stroke his ego a little bit because he's the lead investigator, or excuse me, lead customer service representative. And then tryhards like Adam Lally, who wants a seat at the cool kid table, he's willing to help out his buddies, right? Oh, don't worry, I'll give you as much time as you need to get me that other half of the affidavit. So, hopefully, there is some justice here and these 2 former prosecutors get their full comeuppance. But that's what I got for you guys today. If you enjoyed today's content, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next video from me, and make sure you hit that like button because that tells the YouTube algorithm other people might want to watch this too. And this is a really fascinating case. I'm excited to dive into it even deeper. So if you want to become a member, you can do so by hitting that join button below. And otherwise, thank you all for watching. And until next time.